기자부대! I'm on the beat!
While the supernatural has been fairly commonplace throughout the JoJo series, one thing that is still somewhat elusive is the concepts of ghosts and spirits. While we saw some ghosts in Part 3, we weren't really properly introduced to them in the series until Part 4, and since then their role in the series is clouded in some mystery. Part 5 puts focus on the mechanics of souls and resolve, and Part 6 showcases the idea of even locations and objects having ghosts. Other topics related to ghosts have featured heavily in the spin-offs, like Dead Man's Questions and Thus Spoke Ushibe Rohan. I think there's some very interesting connections to be made between ghosts and the other supernatural abilities of JoJo. So in this video, I'll be going over everything there is to know about ghosts throughout the series. Ghosts are, of course, the spirits of things that have died, as pretty much anyone watching this video would know. But in JoJo, there's a great deal of focus placed on the rules these spirits have to obey, as well as other kinds of spirits that you don't see in other stories. The first thing we should go over is how a ghost is created, which obviously coincides with the death of a person. A person dies when their body is no longer able to sustain itself and the soul is forced to leave. It is possible to heal a body in time and allow a person's soul to re-enter and come back to life, but this can only be done if a soul has the resolve to return to its body. In Part 4, we were introduced to this idea with two different deaths, the death of Ryohei Higashikata and the temporary death of Okuyasu Nijimura. In the first case, although Josuke healed his grandfather's body to perfect condition, his soul had already passed on and he could not return. In Okuyasu's case, his body was also healed after his soul had left, but according to him, he made the conscious choice to resist going to the afterlife and returned back to his body. Both of them had the same exact situation, where the soul was gone and their body was in perfect health. The difference here in why Okuyasu was revived and Ryohei was not, is the soul's own strength of resolve. This idea was explored further in Part 5, with the character Bruno Bucciarati. He was a unique case, someone whose resolve was so strong that it transcended fate itself. At the end of the story, we learned that Bucciarati's death was predetermined by the stand Rolling Stone. Regardless, when he was killed by Diavolo later, his soul still had the resolve to circumvent fate and return to his body, despite his body refusing to be healed to a living state. The strength of Bruno's resolve came from his desire to help his team, and in particular, protect Trish. Through this, Bucciarati was able to puppet his deteriorating body for a few more days, before finally departing for the afterlife when his job was done. This answers the question of how spirits operate immediately after the time of death. But what happens after that, in the rare cases of spirits lingering long after their time? This is when we get into the more recognizable concept of ghosts as introduced in Part 4. There we meet Reimi Sugimoto and Arnold, two ghosts that remained in Morio after their deaths to stop their killer. Reimi died 15 years earlier, but due to her desire to accomplish this goal, she was able to remain in the real world without moving to the afterlife. In Japanese, the series refers to these kinds of ghosts as jibakure or revenants, ghosts bound to a specific location until they find peace. Part 4 also shows us another ghost, Yoshihiro Kira. He remains in the real world to try and protect his son. According to a statement from Araki, he originally intended to write an extended backstory for Kira that showed the abuse he received from his mother. According to him, he says that this abuse is the most likely reason for the father's guilt and willingness to remain in the world to protect his son. Much like how Bucciarati moved to the afterlife after his job was done, Reimi and Arnold also passed on once their mission in Morio was complete. The location that Reimi and Arnold occupy is also interesting since it's the ghost of a location. The ghost alleyway at some point was a real place. It contains multiple houses and was said by Reimi to be the location of the house she was murdered in. Seemingly after the murders, the houses were abandoned, and after time the location was forgotten and considered dead until reality itself erased it from existence. The area surrounding the alley was trapped in some kind of pocket dimension. Even trying to exit from the top was impossible, as Koichi attempted to do with Echoes. The alley is also home to the Ghost Hands, some kind of force that tries to drag people to the afterlife. Once the alley was altered, it became a place invisible to most people. However, certain people are still able to see it, namely stand users. According to Raimi, since Rohan and Koichi are stand users, they're on the same wavelength as her and the Ghost Alley, which is why they can see her and the location. This has actually had basis in past events from Part 3, which was the first time ghosts made an appearance. In Part 3, the only people who see ghosts also happen to be stand users, and no ghosts appeared in the series at any point before then. In a way, you could view stands themselves as a kind of ghost. The Japanese kanji for stand, after all, has the literal translation of ghostly ripple. Since stand users aren't necessarily able to see stands, by extension they're able to see ghosts as well. Stand users aren't the only ones that can see ghosts, however, since we have other examples of beings on this wavelength that don't seem to have stands. First is animals. It was shown in Dead Man's Questions that animals are able to see ghosts. This is a common trope where animals have some kind of inherent sense for the supernatural that humans don't. Living cockroaches were also able to enter Emporio's ghost room, despite it being invisible to most others. In the spin-off manga Dead Man's Questions, the female monk character was also able to see ghosts. As far as we know, she also isn't a stand user, just someone in touch with the world of spirits. Raimi's Alley isn't the only ghost location, however. We also know of quite a few different ones from throughout the series. The next one to appear is the Ghost Mansion from Dead Man's Questions. According to the monk, she also knew of at least 2 other ghost locations in Japan. The ghost location most people may remember is the burned-down music room from the Green Dolphin Street prison. Emporio was able to access this room thanks to his stand burning down the house. One thing that is shared between all ghost locations is the way they appear in the world. Raimi's Ghost Alley appeared between 2 buildings, when normally the buildings have no space in between. The Ghost House in Dead Man's Questions appears in the exact same way. The same is true for the music room, appearing through the wall in the prison stairwell. And all 3 of these are invisible to people that cannot see ghosts. We've also seen that it's not just a location that becomes a ghost, but the objects within it as well. Ghost objects can be used freely by ghosts, but their interaction with the real world is limited. For example, Emporio can chew and taste the ghost chocolate bar, but it eventually phases through him since he's human. Something like Emporio's ghost computer can be destroyed by a bullet, but a ghost gun or knife, for instance, cannot harm a person. However, ghosts or other ghostly beings would still be vulnerable to them. Emporio's stand ability also allowed him to have access to many of these ghost items, which proved to be quite useful despite their lack of direct attack power. By far the most we know about ghosts in JoJo comes from Dead Man's Questions, the 3-chapter spin-off manga that follows Yoshikage Kira's spirit after his death. When Kira died, he became a wandering spirit with no memories of his past life, and entered a kind of limbo that some spirits inhabit. Kira takes work from the monk, who sends him on various jobs as a hitman. The first of these jobs we see is in the 1st chapter, where Kira is sent to kill a child murderer. This manga also shows some of the restrictions that ghosts have. First, they cannot enter a house unless they're invited in. Kira was able to pose as a delivery man, and the woman opening the mail slot still counted as him being invited. If a house is empty, they're free to enter it, like the ghost house that Kira visited. While ghosts are invisible, they can make themselves known in other ways. Kira is able to manipulate physical objects like a knife or a piece of paper, and is able to make humans hear his voice. Ghosts are intangible and can go right through walls or doors, as well as have objects phase through them. Rather than moving on to the afterlife, other spirits like Kira wander the real world invisible to normal people. They hide in the shadows and places that people tend to avoid. Unwanted contact with humans is actually detrimental, since ghosts are easily dismembered and will be left scarred if they can't retrieve their body parts. The general rule seems to be that ghosts cannot directly harm living things, but living things can directly harm ghosts. Much like what I mentioned before with ghost objects, Kira was able to harm a real person using a knife that he picked up, and the dog was able to bite him to cause real damage. Kira himself seems to have no access to Killer Queen, which was presumably destroyed by the alleyway's ghost hands. Something else that this story introduces is the spirit cleansers. Much like how some organisms in the real world exist to eat the dead bodies of others, the spirit cleansers fill the same role when it comes to ghosts. They track down vagabond spirits to eat them, possibly sending them to the afterlife. This is the reason the Earth isn't completely crowded with ghosts. Another type of ghost appears in the Thus Spoke Kashibe Rohan story at a confessional. This was a vengeful spirit that remained in the world to seek revenge. In the story that Rohan was told, the confessor allowed a homeless vagrant to die, who then swore as a ghost to return at the peak of his happiness. Years later, the ghost returned to possess his daughter and punish him. In the OVA adaptation of this story, Okuyasu questions whether this was really a ghost or just some kind of stand ability. While obviously anything added in the anime adaptation should be taken with a grain of salt, this does raise an interesting question about the connection between ghosts and stands. After all, many stands would be viewed in the same way as a ghost by a non-stand user. Notorious B.I.G., for example, was a stand that persisted after its user's death and was fueled by his rage to seek revenge. Almost the same thing as the ghost in the Rohan story. When Jotaro Kujo first discovered that he had Star Platinum, he thought it was an evil spirit possessing him. So it's possible that a person's ghost coming back could be some form of a stand ability, or rather that stands themselves are not so different from ghosts. I think the biggest clue that points to the true nature of ghosts comes from the Steel Ball Run Extra chapter. Although this is connected to a different universe than the one I've been talking about, it does show us that the two universes are still based in the same fundamental principles. Most of the chapter goes over the nature of stand abilities as well as their connections to other powers such as Hamon and Spin. The part I want to focus on though is the often ignored beginning of the chapter that speaks about particles that appear from nothing. It says that subatomic particles have been observed appearing in a vacuum and have the ability to be converted into great energy. It says that concepts such as gravity and mass are born from this principle. This invisible spirit energy is what is able to be harnessed to create a stand. The idea of something being born from nothing is inherently tied to the idea of ghosts. In Dead Man's Questions, Kira thinks to himself how when a mother gives birth, where the baby's soul comes from. Does it come from a piece of the mother's soul, or does it appear inside the child from nowhere? I think both of these answers are true. Much like stands, a person's soul appears from nothing. A person's own spiritual energy is able to live on after their death through the form of a ghost. In this way, everyone is like a proto-stand user just by virtue of having a soul. Stand users are just people who have the extra ability to control the invisible spirit energy to have powers. The idea of a fragment of this soul coming from a person's ancestors is also supported by the manga. It was shown that families are connected by invisible psychic links, and that some special people have very strong bonds that can even connect them through the power of stands. These links between people are referred to as gravity, the force that moves all objects in the world through a predestined fate, and that which draws stand users together. You can think of a person as being made up of two different things, both of which are created by this particle concept. First is the mass, or body, which serves as the vessel and is left behind after death. And the second is gravity, or the soul that is bound to fate. This may be the reason for there not only being ghosts of people, but for objects as well. Since the concept of mass is born from this idea of particles appearing from nothing, it is this same idea that results in residual ghosts being left behind when objects are destroyed. These particles, by extension, also make up all of the other abilities in the series. We know for a fact that Hamon and stands are intertwined. This is the reason why. Hamon is just one form of this potential spirit energy that exists in humanity. A different expression of the same energy becomes a stand or ghostly ripple. In Steel Ball Run, spin and stands are also connected. Mastery of spin and the golden ratio can create a stand, and can also empower an existing stand. Since stands are just another expression of a golden ratio's energy, this process can also take place in reverse, where stands can tap into the power of spin that's already latent inside them. The ghosts in JoJo exist to give us a special look into the underlying principles of the supernatural world. Every part in JoJo deals with concepts such as the resolve of people's souls, and the powers they can tap into as a result of that. Hopefully this video gave you a better understanding of ghosts, and by extension, the JoJo series as a whole. If you have another idea for a video topic similar to this one, comment it down below. If you want to be updated on new videos and chapters, join the Hamon Beat Discord using the link in the description. To receive rewards like Discord perks and some uncut videos, you can support the channel on Patreon. And finally, for future videos, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. This is the part of the video where I thank my $5 and up patrons. Thank you to Alex Ramirez, Doorbell, Ashton Joseph Miller, Crayon, Rigo Vids, Zukato, Sentai, Pumpkin Doge, Marrow, Almighty Quarth, Oof, Cowrie, Halil, Gatlin Grove, Vess, Lime Jinjo, 17-Hit Combo, and Phantom Kai.